To start off the conversation, now the term good governance has, been around for ages, but its meaning keeps changing. How do you define good governance today?
So I think good governance is actually transparent, it's accountable, inclusive and effective, and importantly, I think responsive to the needs of the community we serve. And the community is consistently engaged in sharing when developing these policies that actually affect their lives.
So how does good governance look like in society today, looking at community?
Community, we are the level of government that's closest to the community. So we have 3 levels of government in Australia: federal, state and local. And so community is very, very important when it comes to governance. I think transparency of decision making is very important. There must be processes that actually are open, accessible to the public. When it comes to rule of law, what's really important is that we need to have a framework for fairness and impartiality. And it's important that laws are applied consistently, have mechanisms for grievances to be heard and addressed, and make sure that that's made, people are made aware of that. Equity and inclusiveness is also very, very important because communities' needs must be addressed. Responsiveness, because all of those actually builds trust between those who are governing and our community. It builds social cohesion and improves quality of life.
Good governance is everybody's business. We spoke about all of this and more with Cade. Stay tuned.
For 30 years, LMD has been the voice of business in Sri Lanka, capturing the pulse of the nation's corporate landscape through its iconic covers. Each cover tells a story, from the first edition in 1994 to the present day, narrating key moments, leaders and trends that have shaped Sri Lanka's business ecosystem. Over the years, LMD covers have featured thought leaders, business pioneers and game-changing innovations, reflecting the evolution of industries and the economy. As we celebrate 30 years, these covers represent more than just publications. They are a testament to LMD's legacy of excellence in business journalism and its unwavering commitment to being Sri Lanka's leading voice of business. LMD, Sri Lanka's voice of business, a legacy of 30 years.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. The topic of conversation today is good governance priorities, and I'm here with lawyer, mediator, conflict management specialist and former mayor of the Glen Eira City Council, Melbourne, Australia, Cade. Anne-Marie, it's lovely to have you on our show.
Thank you for having me. I'm really delighted to be able to do this with you today.
To start off the conversation, now the term good governance has, been around for ages, but its meaning keeps changing. To start things off for our audience as well, how do you define good governance today?
Yes, so I think good governance is actually transparent, it's accountable, inclusive and effective, and importantly, I think responsive to the needs of the community we serve. And it's essential to have a framework for decision making that is ethically and managed ethically, that the resources are managed efficiently, and the community is consistently engaged in sharing when developing these policies that actually affect their lives.
Anne-Marie, you made a lot of reference to community, which is very interesting. So how does good governance look like in society today, looking at community?
Yes, so I made reference to community because my expertise is actually in local government. So I was a former mayor in my municipality. So community, we are the level of government that's closest to the community. So we have 3 levels of government in Australia: federal, state and local. And so community is very, very important when it comes to governance. So when I am talking of good governance in practice, I think transparency of decision making is very important. There must be processes that actually are open, accessible to the public, where we have the public, giving us their feedback on budgets, on operations, and there should be communication channels for public scrutiny. And I think we do that quite well in Australia. Also accountability, so answerable to the community that we serve. And like I said, clear channels of communication and reporting on that feedback and taking that into account. Also ensuring participation of the community, but not just the loudest voices, but marginalized and vulnerable groups as well, because sometimes, they get drowned out. And it's really important to ensure that we engage with vulnerable groups. When it comes to rule of law, what's really important is that we need to have a framework for fairness and impartiality. And it's important that laws are applied consistently, have mechanisms for grievances to be heard and addressed, and make sure that that's made, people are made aware of that. Also, when it comes to efficiency, whatever is done must achieve a community benefit. So delivering services which are promptly and effectively. Equity and inclusiveness is also very, very important, because communities' needs must be addressed. Responsiveness, because continually a community's needs are changing, right? So it's important to make decisions with foresight. Another thing that's really important is sustainability, and we must consider the impact on the environment, on the economy and community well-being, to ensure that there's resilience when it comes to local systems and services, because all of those actually builds trust between those who are governing and our community. It builds social cohesion and improves quality of life.
Talking of governing bodies, when we look at good governance, we always say that it's the responsibility of governments as well as governing bodies to ensure the well-being of the masses. But we're seeing across the world that this is becoming more challenging by the day. Why do you think so?
And that's a really great question, because there are so many challenges. Something that actually is concerning is polarization and divisiveness. There's rise of partisanship, polarized along political, cultural, and ideological lines. And it's difficult to build consensus, right? So when it comes to decision making, that is very challenging. Echo chambers, particularly with the rise of social media, digital channels, they tend to amplify that divisive narrative, and there's no opportunity for that constructive dialogue. And I use the word dialogue and not debate. And I do that quite intentionally, because debate almost has that connotation of us versus them. It doesn't really allow for that constructive communication and dialogue, whereas dialogue, it gives you the opportunity to hear the other person and what they have to say, right? Another challenge is, I think there's an erosion of trust. There's public cynicism, due to corruption, misinformation, unfulfilled promises, obscure decision-making processes, which actually hinder good governance. And then, of course, globalization and the complexity of issues that we all have to deal with, like climate change, pandemics, there's economic inequality. All these issues actually require a coordinated response. And it's really difficult to achieve that with fragmented government systems. We saw that during the pandemic, some countries did it really well, where governments worked together, and tailored responses. And governments that did that actually, did quite well and were able to deal with the situation much better. Also, competing priorities, governments need to balance national interests and international obligations. That can cause conflict. Of course, then we've got technology changes, that you throw into the mix, and there's information overload, right? And that can actually sometimes lead to decision paralysis. Then we have cyber security threats. So all of that actually contributes to this issue. And another thing I think which is quite terrible is the incivility in public discourse. There's hostility, personal attacks on political leaders, which actually erodes collaboration. But the good thing is that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I think all these are challenges which we can actually deal with and deal with well. And it comes back again to, that transparency, collaborative leadership. Also, I think civic leadership, civic education of the public, and conflict management. Of course, I always come back to conflict management because that's my jam, and I think it's really important to be able to have those really difficult conversations.
And what about the corporate world? Businesses are faced with a lot of changing and very challenging business dynamics. For example, the increase of technology today. So against this backdrop, what does good governance look like for the corporate world?
I think it's important for corporates to adopt a forward-thinking mindset. The concept of leadership itself has actually changed. From someone who, you have the chairman of the board of directors or the CEO, and you'd have them sort of lording over the entire organization. It doesn't happen that way anymore. It needs to be more inclusive. I think critical skills of really effective leaders is the ability to actually listen, engage with employees and everyone else in the organization, and again comes back to the accountability and transparency. We have access now, to so much data. So data-driven decision making would inform that decision making process, which I think can be quite useful. We can use that to actually enhance transparency. Real-time reporting of financial performance, sustainability goals, also governance practices. I think it's really important to ensure that there is the awareness. Of course, cybersecurity, data protection, very, very important, ensuring compliance with regulations. Adapting to technological change, and that's hard. That needs training. It needs reskilling. I'm not just upskilling, and I'm intentionally saying reskilling because it's new. The whole world of AI and how we do things differently. So when it comes to ethical leadership, I think it's important to also look at not just at the needs of stakeholders like shareholders, but actually look at the impact that has on employees, on customers, on the community, right? So again, diversity, inclusivity, and I think education on leadership is key because there's so much happening now that can impact how successful an organization can be.
It's time now to take a very short break, but we'll soon be back to talk more about good governance priorities.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging media.
Welcome back to the show. We are in conversation with the former mayor of the Glen Eira City Council, Melbourne, Australia, Cade. And in your view, how should companies balance good governance and profitability?
Yes, and that also is a really great question because does it come does it come at the cost of the other, right? Does good governance come at the cost of profitability? And I don't think so. I think we can manage that quite well. It's again about, I think, balancing good governance with profitability is actually the key to sustainable success, right? While meeting your stakeholder expectations. So it's really important to align those ethical practices and accountability with your financial objectives. Looking at long-term perspectives rather than short-term. So long-term value creation. I think it's also very important to embed environmental, social, and governance principles into the operations of the organization, because that builds trust. Aligning governance with your strategic goals, because sometimes governance is looked at as a burden, and that should not be the case. It actually is the foundation, right? So it's really important that we see it like that. A good governance culture, I think, where leaders would model ethical behavior, I think, is important. And having that employee engagement. I like the term profit with purpose, right? Recognizing that governance related investments, such as employee well-being or community engagement, they yield indirect financial returns. And, that's why I think it's important to, look beyond what we're getting in the short term. So it's again that, cost versus value discussion, and evaluating the costs of governance initiatives against their long-term value to profitability. And again, measurement and to communicate impact. I think that's really important as well, where you track performance metrics. And, we can do that quite well now. And I think if we do that, then, there is an understanding of where you're heading. So that would be, I think, a good approach.
We're almost at the end of our conversation, Anne-Marie, but I have one last question for you before you go. You mentioned the participation of community in a previous answer. When we talk of good governance, we say that it's the unified efforts of all stakeholders, from households to the private sector and government. So how should and how could we promote this holistic approach to good governance?
Yeah, it's a shared endeavor, isn't it? And it's really important, I think, to, foster those shared values and visions. Common goals are really important. Good governance at the end of the day is rooted in the principles of equity, accountability, sustainability, and inclusivity. So we need to drive public awareness campaigns, I think, about that. Strengthen, again, I come back to civic education, encouraging participation in democratic processes, youth engagement. I think, there are future leaders, very, very important. And I think that civic education will drive that interest, and get us the leaders we really need to build a really great country. And, building collaborative platforms, partnerships between governments and businesses to address challenges like climate change, public health, safety issues. Community forums, I think, are very, very important. We do that well in Australia. Also when it comes to corporate responsibility, fair labor practices, again, environmental sustainability, building that into their goals. Recognizing and rewarding contributions, I think, is important. Also incentivizing good practices. And acknowledging and rewarding the efforts of businesses and community leaders and individuals to promote good governance, I think, is very, very important, because, like I said, it's a shared endeavor, right? And publicizing those success stories. And I think that's something that you do quite well at LMD, share examples of really successful governance collaborations. And that really inspires others, right? And something else I think that's really important is, combating inequality, because we need to reduce the disparities in wealth, in education, access to resources, and because that really hinders the participation actually in good governance. So, and something else I think we really need to mention, anti-corruption measures. We need to really have robust anti-corruption policies. and deter corruption. So I think all of that would hold us in good stead, because at the end of the day, when we empower our local communities and address barriers to engagement, by aligning the efforts of households, of businesses, of civil, of society, of governments, through education, through collaboration, transparency, we build really resilient systems that serve the common good. And I think that's something that is very, very important.
We've been in conversation with the former mayor of the Glen Eira City Council, Melbourne, Australia, Anne-Marie Cade. Anne-Marie, thank you very much for an insightful interview.
Thank you for having me again. It's been absolutely delightful.
And thank you to all our viewers for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram and X. Thank you for watching and stay safe.